Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smoko podcast. My name is Alexis Armstrong, your host. Nice to meet you. The Smoko podcast is a place to celebrate and highlight women, trans women, and non-binary folk working within STEM and trade occupations. So please tune in, take a break, join us. We are on Smoko. And today I'm extremely excited to be joined by Katrina Van Osch-Saxon, who is a professor at Fleming College. She is in the School of Environment and Natural Resources. She studies something called urban forestry and agriculture, which I do not know that much about. So I'm so excited to learn more and to understand her research, what she does for tree care and forest health. She's also a homesteader and has a wonderful YouTube where she kind of discusses how to live off the grid and basics of sustainability and being connected to resources. So I can't wait to have that conversation too, because I also don't know much about homesteading. This is all going to be new to me. So Katrina, thank you so much for coming on the show. I can't wait to talk about sustainability, forestry, you name it, all of the above. Thank you so much for coming on Smoko.
Thank you, Alexis. I'm really excited. I've, just as we kind of mentioned and chatted before we came on, I was diving into some of your really cool content and listening to some of the podcasts, and it was so inspiring and inspirational. And just recently, if I can for a moment, I heard a quote about, I can't even remember where I heard it or who said it, so forgive me, but it was about the strength of a web. And so, and of course, I envisioned a spider web and how it's as strong as all of the smaller fibers. And, when you can look and think about that in two kind of different perspectives, or maybe more than two, but I look at it as I could be the web or I could be a part of the web. And so thank you for including me in your web, because it's so important to hear these stories and for women to be inspired by other women and people in general, because I'll tell you, maybe as we move through this, that I've had most of the mentors in my life, especially at a young age, were men. And now that the kind of tables have turned, because I've been a part of this amazing, amazing web. So thank you.
Oh my goodness. That's such a beautiful way to start. And thank you. I had never heard that before, of the web kind of analogy. And I know that that's probably going to stick with me for a while. It's probably going to be on my brain all day today of being like,
good.
think about, like, that's beautiful to be like part of the web or the spider. Like it's beautiful to be part of your web as well, and to have you on the show. And like, that's what Smoke was all about, honestly, is like, it's kind of a selfish pursuit, really, at the end of the day. Like, I get so much inspiration and joy from meeting women within the community and maybe different fields of the larger community of women in science and trades. And it's such an honor. So thank you. Thank you for being part of it. And maybe if that's how we could start, because you're a professor at Fleming College and you teach urban forestry and agriculture, and maybe it was one of those male mentors when you were a kid, but like, how did you discover this? Like, how did you discover forestry? And then what drew you that you were like, you know what? Yep, I'm a forester. This is me. Like, how'd that happen?
Yeah. So first, like so many women that I've watched on it and listened to, because I mostly watch YouTube because I like to see the people who are talking to me. I've not followed a very traditional path. When I think about my career, honestly, have you seen those videos of football players like kicking the ball and then running after it? Because like it's called like the fumble. I have fumbled my way into this career, honestly. But once I like grabbed the ball and picked it up, I ran. And it took me a very long time to run. And so as a kid, I'm the middle child of three girls in the family. And my dad his family came here from Holland when he was really young. And so he, as well as my mom, had a love of the outdoors. And so to help supplement their income, my dad was a self-taught arborist just to make some extra money. And so I grew up as the classic tomboy in the family, where I wanted to be outside with my dad all the time. And so I watched him do this thing, self-trained. So I'm going to say it now, that like, it's not the safest or some of the best techniques, but he didn't know any better and was supporting his family. And then I met my husband actually in high school, and he went to Fleming College and took forestry technician program, but also at the time it was called urban arboriculture. And so he was an arborist. But because of how I was raised, and women, because I was smart, I was encouraged to go off to university, and I loved animals. So of course I thought I was going to be a vet, but during that time discovered a love of insects and forest health. But ultimately, after being married, and we both had really great jobs, my husband and I felt a need in our community for tree care. And so
Mm.
I worked for him as his ground assistant, and I just watched and learned. But I also worked with my dad and other members of my family. And so I watched this
Whoa.
trade right in front of my
Yeah.
eyes.
Your
But
entire
to
life.
be, yeah, I never considered that it could be me.
Mm.
And that is something that even to this day frustrates me. Like, I think about the whys and I really just don't know why. I don't know
Mm.
why. And then there came a time where I realized this is something that I could do. And so after university, I graduated with my Bachelor of Science.
Mhm.
I wanted to go to school to actually get the piece of paper that said I could do this job.
Yeah.
So I went back to school later in life to become an arborist, got my certificate. And at that time, actually, an opportunity opened at the college to teach forest health. And so the rest is really history. Like, that's how I came to be where I am. And so those are the fumbles, right? Like,
Yeah.
oh, like, like chasing that ball or that dream, and really understanding where I really wanted to be, which
Yeah.
was in the trees, outside, working in the trees, extending their life, maintaining them in a good way, so that finding that balance between, human risk and risk in general, and tree health and all of the benefits that they kind of give to us
Mhm.
and to the ecosystem, all of those ecosystem services that we talk
That
about.
we need, yeah.
Yeah, that are
That
essential for
that
us
are
to live.
essential.
Yes,
Yeah, exactly, that we need in our life and we need as a planet. That's
exactly.
Oh my goodness. It's so funny when you're telling that story and you described it. Like, I do love that analogy of following the football and kind of that fumble. And then as soon as you found the football, you ran with it and you took off. But like from an outsider perspective, it doesn't really feel fumbly. Like from somebody who maybe isn't within the industry, like it feels very faded. And it feels very
Mm.
beautiful that you had maybe a different path other than like a direct, I'm going to go straight to becoming an arborist. But it does sound like all of your experience was still linked with that as the main goal, whether you knew it or not. And like to have a background in bugs and entomology and understanding the biology side of it, to then come back to tree health and to have your husband and your dad and these wonderful mentors to work with them and like learn real hand experience while you also had technical knowledge. Like it doesn't sound fumbly at all. It sounds very like divine life purpose in like
Yeah.
full circle moment, truthfully.
Well, honestly, I never thought about it. And I think that's something, we encourage young people, especially in the role that I have, to really think about, what do you want to do? I never thought about what I wanted to do. I just kept on going, like
Mm,
it was just like, oh, this kind of looks cooler. This kind of looks funner. I want to do that. And I've been answering that call a lot more in this stage of my life, right? I've realizing what you want to do and then chasing that dream, because that's really big, and
mhm.
having the courage to dream, which is a common thread in a lot of these discussions that you have and that I have with young people, is chasing that dream. So thank you for saying I wasn't fumbling, but
No.
that is the vision that I kind of have, and
Yeah.
that it's okay, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't, all
Totally.
of those
Mhm.
experiences brought me to where I am right now. All of the
Mhm.
challenges, struggles, failures, so important, right?
Yeah.
Brought me to this moment with you right now.
Yeah. No, it's
Hmm.
it's pretty beautiful. And I think that's a good ad of being like, okay, let's redefine the fumble and it doesn't have to be a bad thing. And it's a
Right.
very beautiful, beautiful kind of winding path to get there. And it's so common. And it is interesting. I think we'll talk about this probably in a little bit when we talk about like women in the woods and women in the trees. But it is funny that maybe you didn't think of it, that wasn't presented to you and that wasn't presented as a direct option back in the day of becoming an
Hmm.
arborist. But I love that you eventually found your way to working in the trees, and I think that's really beautiful. When we talk about your work right now as a professor at Fleming, before we kind of dive into teaching and really forestry and tree health and sustainability, I was wondering, could we define some things for people like me who doesn't really know much about this industry? Could we kind of explain urban forestry and how that's
Hmm.
different from traditional forestry? Because I was like, I didn't know that there was two things. And then could we actually explain the term arboriculture and an arborist and what that actually entails and what that means? So those two things of urban forestry, how it's different, and then what is arboriculture? I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly, and being an arborist? Arborist,
Yeah.
an
Yeah.
arborist.
Hey, it's okay. It's okay because I know very little about geoscience. Luckily, one of my best friends is a geologist, so kind of I learned through her. And you know what? It is such a good question, and it is one that I answer hundreds of times a year and thousands of times now in my career,
Mhm.
especially when we talk to young people wanting to come into the industry because they're confused. You know, like,
Yeah.
doesn't the same person care for all trees? And my answer is yes, absolutely, if that's what you want to do. So I'll start with traditional forestry. I
Okay.
know you had Emma on the podcast
Yeah.
a couple of months ago, and she was great and did a very good job of explaining kind of what she does. So traditional forestry is the care and management or maintenance of large tracts of forest, crown forest lands, and even private forests, but large forest stands. And it often deals with the production of forest timber or forest products for human use and consumption on a very large scale,
Mhm.
generally speaking. And we're very good at it here in Canada. Urban forestry is the care and management of forests that are part of our urban environments.
Mm.
So in cities, municipalities, developed areas, both urban and peri-urban, which is the transition area between urbanization or urbanized areas and the trees beyond. So manage larger tracts of forest. So we also deal in that peri-urban forest, which I live in. So although I live in the country, it's
Mhm.
still part of the urban
Prairie
forest.
forest. Okay.
Yeah. And then an arborist, and there are so many really great definitions out there. I didn't even take the time to write them down, but it is care of single trees that are part of a larger urban
Oh,
forest.
okay.
And at Fleming, we have the arboriculture program, which is basically students learn the science behind tree care, but they are going to be trained in proper climbing techniques and use of aerial devices to maintain trees in backyards and cities and things like that. So you are familiar, I'm sure, with
Mhm.
these folks who maintain the trees so to reduce the risk that they pose to people, so that they can continue to provide all of those great benefits that we've talked about. And so I would say that arboriculture is part of urban forestry. They are an essential piece of how we manage urban forests and keep them healthy and growing, into the future.
That's amazing. Thank you. That was a perfect definition of it. And it was also a perfect definition of maybe the difference between urban and traditional forestry, because I think traditional forestry is probably what people go to. I know it's what I go to when I think of forestry. I go through, maybe it's because I'm Canadian and we do forestry very well in Canada. You
Yeah.
think of like large cutbacks, like you don't really think of urban or peri urban environments and settings. And it sounds like both of these things are a 1-2 punch. Like one is looking at like an
Yes.
individual tree and the techniques of how to manage that tree in particular and how to trim it, how to do the technical aspect, like the trades aspect of it, and then how to then bring it back to a unit and understand tree health and forest health within an urban setting. Are there different challenges that come with an urban setting that are far different than traditional
Oof.
forestry? I'm guessing there is.
Yeah.
There must be.
No, you know what? It's such a good question. As you're speaking, my brain, I have those two parts of the brain because so one of the big pieces of this, and the reason I think for a lot of people why when they think forestry they think clear cuts, is
Mhm.
because that's how we used to manage forests. But through science and research we've learned so much, and we've changed how we manage forests. And because through industrialization, people moved away from forests and moved
Mhm.
into city centers where there weren't a lot of trees. But then we realized, or that
We
trees
need
were
it.
so essential and important, and we needed green space. And so then them are like, okay, well, we've developed these areas with concrete and hard infrastructure.
Mhm.
How do we put
Bring
these
it
trees
back.
back in, and yeah, and keep them there so that they can provide all of these wicked benefits that we tout all the time? And so trees and urban infrastructure are like oil and is it oil and water or oil and
Oil and
vinegar,
water.
right?
Yeah, oil and
Oil
water.
and water. Oil and vinegar is a salad dressing. Sorry, is it's difficult, and just working within the parameters of development and having all the parties communicate. And that's
Mhm.
one huge part of urban forestry, is that, and my colleagues and I joke with our students all the time, if you don't like working with people, then urban forestry is not for you, because you work a lot with people through education and through planning, and that can be the most difficult part. It is so enjoyable and so fulfilling and rewarding, but there are definitely a lot of challenges. And the good thing is urban forestry is gaining a ton of traction,
Hmm.
and now that people realize that they need green in their
Yeah.
lives to be happy and just to support their mental health, their physical health, and just their overall well-being. And so that is why urban forestry has become so important and is so important and will continue to be into the future.
That's amazing. Thank you for that answer. And thank you for kind of walking through the historic context of like how cities were made and maybe with industrialization where we moved. Because I think that's a
Hmm.
good, like some of our infrastructure is so old, even in a young country like Canada. And yeah, how do you bring it back to nature? How do you bring it back to
Yeah,
green space when you realize to be like, okay, well, we need a natural environment and we need a natural system within a very urbanized creation and a very
right.
urbanized setting that we've made really inhospitable from a
Mhm.
natural system. And so, how do you connect those two things? I think that's absolutely fascinating. I think it's so cool to see the evolution of green space. I know, like, when you look at the sci fi photos of being like, this is what society is going to look like, to have all those green spaces on buildings and within city centers. I think that there's just so much cool things coming on with the future of urban agriculture and urban forestry that
Yes.
um, very, very interesting stuff. To take a step back and to dive into a little bit with your research and your work is really looking at forest health. And
Yep.
my understanding is with your fascination with bugs and entomology that you do a lot of impacts of exotic pests and pathogens. And I was wondering, could you describe your work and maybe the current state of urban forestry in terms of tree health? Like, what are the biggest threats that we have currently? Is that different per system or is that consistent across Canada? I'm sorry, that's a very big multi-part question, so take your time with
It, no,
it.
it is a very good question, and my main role really in the job that I do as around forest health, because I do teach a lot of different courses in different programs. So I teach in our
Mm,
forestry technician program, urban forestry, and horticulture. But one of my big jobs is raising awareness and teaching students how to identify what to do when they do identify, and kind of just how to monitor landscapes and ecosystems for invasive species. And I remember I tell my students this story all the time. In my first year of teaching, I had a student stand up at the back of the class and ask why they needed to learn this about
mm.
insects. Basically, we were in the entomology section. And my answer was, and I was so nervous, and I was like, oh my gosh, this job is not for me. Like, if these are this is what I'm going to be up against, right? And the quickest thing I could think of, because I'm really not fast on my feet, was it's going to keep you employed.
Mm,
And that is honestly the truth, because since I've started, when I first started in my interview, I was asked to educate the committee, or the interview panel, about emerald ash borer. And at the time, it had just come, because I'm originally from Niagara. At the time, it had just kind of reared its ugly little head,
mhm.
which is actually quite beautiful, but that's a topic for another day, in Niagara.
Mm,
And at that time, we didn't really understand the impacts of that insect on our forests locally. And I knew what the devastation could look like, because it had already started to impact other parts of Southern Ontario. And since then, we've kind of been there, done that with emerald ash borer, and are
mhm.
still doing that, trying to manage it, and through science and research, thinking of ways to, manage that insect in the landscape. But we are now staring down spotted lanternfly,
Mhm.
which is a pest from the order Hemiptera, which pierces and sucks plant sap. And because its host plant is so diverse, I mean, there's so many species that this insect feeds on, yeah,
It's
like
everywhere.
there are a
Mhm.
lot of insect pests and pathogens. So same thing. Oak wilt was discovered here this past summer, which is a pathogen that kills oak trees, which are in our Carolinian forest in the southern Ontario, and still here in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence forest region are also a common species of tree. Very worrisome. We have hemlock woolly adelgid on the west coast. You have your
Yeah.
own suite of pests and pathogens.
Mhm.
On the east coast, they have their own suite of pests and pathogens. And so, like, literally, my passion is around trying to keep these trees in the landscape. And as individuals, we all kind of have a responsibility to work together and to educate. And that has been the greatest good news story, is through like online platforms like
Mm,
iNaturalist and EdMaps, empowering people, the public, with the tools to be able to, first of all, recognize and then report these things
Hmm.
so that the professionals, the
Can
scientists and
come
the
in.
researchers can come in and
Hmm.
manage. And so that is what I'm really passionate about and excited about. Always, though, thinking in the back of my mind around how important these insects and pathogens are where they're from in natural ecosystems, and how some of them,
Hmm.
like spongy moth, have become naturalized. They've been here so long that they're now just part of our
The
landscape.
ecosystem.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, and I think, humans just have so much power. We don't realize a lot of the time how impactful our actions can be, like moving wood products. You know,
Oh,
the
wow.
old don't move firewood signs, kind of, you see them once and it's like, oh really, I shouldn't, and then you just see them over and over and people kind of forget these things. But that's how a lot of these pests and pathogens travel in our landscapes. And so a little bit of education really does go a long way. And so that's what I'm passionate about. If I do one job well, my hope is that it is arming our students with the education, and I guess giving them motivation to educate other people, because that's
Hmm.
kind of how this works, right? The more, the better
Hmm.
you do, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Thank you for like walking through that current state of like what's going on with our trees and where are we at with tree health and why is this happening, which we talked a little bit about, but maybe we can go into it in a little bit more detail. Is what are the big threats right now for forestry, right? And like how
Hmm.
is that related to bugs? And I love that answer. I love that thinking on your feet of being like it will keep you employed. Like it is so important in terms of forest health is understanding that that's pretty interesting and pretty cool. But it also, I love that answer of education. We talk a lot about kind of tree planting and we talk about sustainability, biodiversity, like sustainability in terms of forestry and resource extraction. And I know that's more traditional forestry. I know that there's probably so many misconceptions concerning
Hmm.
forestry and agriculture. And I know that this is probably one in 1,000 that you could be like, yeah, you guys don't know this. Y'all are getting this all wrong. But as the public, if there's maybe like a couple misconceptions that we should be aware of and some understanding that we should be aware of, and then any new practices that we should put in place to save our forests.
Oh, that is good. There are a lot. Okay. So one of the most common questions I have from students
Hmm.
who are considering coming into, and I'm going to talk traditional forestry right now. Our traditional forestry program is, or statements, I guess it would be, is I don't want to cut trees.
Mm.
And that is one of the biggest misconceptions. I'm
Yes.
not using, I don't want to paint the entire industry, because I'm sure there are folks out there, and of course I'm talking specifically in Canada because that's what I'm familiar with, especially Ontario. The reason why we are so passionate about forestry, becoming a registered professional forester, becoming a forest technician with a certificate, is because we focus and we pride ourselves on sustainable forest
Hmm.
management and conservation.
Yeah.
That is what the problem is. When people think, and I think I might have even thought this at some points in my life, was, especially I started as a tree planter. So when I first started, all I saw was clear cuts. And
Hmm.
so I was slamming trees in the ground, hoping to,
Balance it.
do my part and find
Hmm.
a balance. But the reason why we do what we do is so that we as humans can continue our very comfortable lifestyles. And so the easy things to do as one person would be to think about, when you consume something, think about, is it, if you have the option between wood and plastic, always choose wood, because
Mm.
you're choosing something in a form that is going to hold carbon as long as that thing, whatever
Yeah.
it is, exists. So even in building projects now, especially, I mean, you folks out on the West Coast are some of the leaders in wood building, big timber structure, mass timber structures, because we know that that is captured carbon that is going to sit there for as long as that
Hmm.
building. Everything in my house that is wood, I'm sitting on a wood floor. I have wood sills around my windows. I have wooden furniture. Everything in here that we could possibly make of wood, we did, because it captures carbon and holds it. And so that is one thing as a consumer that people can do that I think is relatively It's low
Accessible.
hanging fruit and
Yeah.
it's accessible to everyone. And again, Alexis, I know I keep saying education, but that's what it is.
Mhm.
It's about showing people what we do and why it's important, and not hiding kind of what we do in order to have all of the things that we have. And this includes mining as well.
Oh, yeah,
In order
totally.
to have all the things that
Yeah.
we have, all these luxuries, resource extraction is part of that. And so our job is to do that in the best way that we can. And Maya Angelou, I think it said, once you know better, you do better. And
Mhm.
that is what sustainable forest management is. We have learned so much, and there are so many folks out there that are doing such good work in research. And from that, we learn, okay, so instead of just using a tree for 2x4s, which
Mhm.
most of us are familiar with, we can use it in so many other ways. So byproducts of basically the processing of timber are used in road building now. And so, like, seriously, lipsticks
Yeah.
and all of these
So
things.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. So I think it's just spreading the good word,
Mhm.
honestly, and realizing that through sound education, that is steering us towards sustainable forest management. We need these things.
Mhm.
So we have to do it in a way that
Is
we are,
sustainable.
yeah, and we're leaving areas untouched, and we're focusing on the areas that have been under production for a very long time.
Mhm.
And we're continuing to use those areas instead of moving into new. That's
New
it.
forest.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you for that answer. And I know when I had Emma on the show and when we talked about, and Emma's a family friend and we grew up
Oh,
together.
so good.
And like I've just always been blown away by what she does. But one of the big things and why I wanted to have her on the show is to really kind of have that debunk conversation on environmentalism in terms of forestry and to change maybe that public perception of what it means to be a forester, because her
Hmm.
background is all in environment and it's all in ecology. She's an ecologist that happens to do forestry, but like at her heart she is an ecologist. And so having that kind of change in public perception of forestry, because I do think that we have this idea, and maybe we'll have more long-term negative impacts without us even realizing. But we have this idea to be like, we shouldn't cut down any trees. All trees should not be cut down. And we should move to like maybe man made plastics or synthetics. And you're like, that actually probably
Mm,
has a more long term negative than if we cut down our trees and if we do so in a sustainable way. Because from a mining background, we were always told if it's not grown, it's mined. That was our kind of, you see it on bumper stickers, you see it all over the mining
yeah.
industry of if we haven't grown it ourselves, we have taken it out of the ground. That is where most of our resources, if not all, come from. Like we have to do it in a sustainable way because it's so necessary to civilization. We have all of these industrial comforts that are based on resource extraction. So thank you for that call out of being the carbon capture aspect of it and maybe that
Hmm.
green long-term aspect of choosing a natural product and doing so getting that product in the best way possible and in the most sustainable way possible. And the fact that forestry is a science, like, and I think some people don't
Yes.
think that forestry is a science, but it is a science. It is a true biology field or
Hmm.
sub branch. It's forest health. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And one of the other things I would say too, because I think this is not a lot of people consider this, and Emma touched on it in her talk too, around before anything happens in a forest, we go in and we ask and answer the question to the best of our ability: who lives here now?
Hmm.
And how can we do this in a way that impacts them the least, right?
Hmm.
And that is so important before anything happens. All of these considerations have to be made, and we look past the point of harvest to what that forest is going to look like after. And I think that is something else. It's not, the harvesting is this just the smallest piece. There's so much
Yeah.
that goes into, planning and research and understanding. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's something else too that would be nice to highlight.
Yeah. Is the like the amount of work, the breadth of work, and like that final process is maybe 5% of the
Yes.
actual lifespan of forestry. No,
Hmm.
fantastic call out. I would like Katrina to take a little bit of time to talk about your teaching because you're a professor. And I wanted to maybe ask if you have a favorite topic or a theme to teach, and basically how that
Mm.
feels, because you're teaching like the next generation of forestry professionals. And like, I'm sure it probably feels really good to give them that aha moment, or teaching something fundamental, or seeing them maybe look at the world a little bit differently. I know that that's probably a fantastic thing. So, do you have one of those, a favorite topic or theme to teach?
It changes. When I first started, 100% forest health, and I still have such a passion, especially as we kind of start looking at or start interacting and having a relationship with all of these new invasive species that are coming at us in all directions. And being from Ontario, right, they're coming from both coasts, kind of
Yeah.
thing. And I once heard somebody said to me, those that can't do teach, and I laughed because it's interesting to think about teaching from that perspective. I'll tell you right out, it's not true.
Mhm.
Some of the people that I work with are the most intelligent and skilled folks that I'm blessed to be able to spend literally every day with.
Yeah.
But as I've kind of followed or walked down the path in education, I have learned so much about people. But one of my biggest passions currently, I've been kind of on my own journey learning about different Indigenous cultures and how that relates to education and the planet. And for me now, it is first and foremost. And the reason why I like to teach and that I have a YouTube channel is because I like to share the things that I love. And I want it's selfish because I want people to feel the same excitement and energy that I have for these things. But it's really trying to connect the dots for people and have them connect the dots themselves, because that is that aha moment.
Mhm.
Understanding, because we can teach theory and we can teach a skill all day long, but that connection to the planet has to happen individually,
Mhm.
differently for every person. And when the student has that holy smokes moment,
Yeah.
that aha moment, their energy and excitement and the passion for the field that they are in
Takes
is
off.
there. That's
Yeah.
that's it.
Mhm.
That is it. And it's typically right before they're about to leave and graduate. That is when this happens, or that they make the decision. Holy smokes! Like, it lights another
Mhm.
fire, and they decide, they're going to take another program or head off to another post-secondary institution, whatever it is. That is the moment. And so there is really not just one thing, Alexis. It's because for every student, that aha moment happens differently, especially when you see it with students who really struggle. And when they get it, it's just like, it makes their
Oh,
lives so much
yeah.
easier because they understand kind of the purpose of why they're taking all of these courses and all of this stuff, because it finally just kind of comes together
Mm.
and they see the whole picture.
Mm.
And for me, that is the best part. So I try my hardest to attack things in different ways. If I can feel they're not getting it, or I can see the look, it's like, all right, how am I, how am I going to do this? And, honestly, it's from storytelling. It's from
Mhm.
things like this where you can hear other people, or I tell stories about my experiences, or, when I had that aha moment, or like,
Mhm.
holy, like, this is how these things are connected, because we'll teach about soils in this course and tree
Mm.
health in this course, and then we connect them, and then it's like,
Oh my
whoa.
goodness. Whoa, there's two
Yeah,
parts
right.
of the tree. There's the soil
Yeah,
and the actual tree,
that
and then there's water, and
that's
then
it.
there's, yeah,
Right.
it's
Yes.
big picture. That's
Yes.
gorgeous. Yeah. I could see that just being that moment where it clicks. And I love that kind of call out of being like, you know what, it's going to be different for every single person. And we can't really get them there by teaching them one topic or one specific thing. That's not how education works. And that's not how the big
Hmm.
picture works of all of a sudden you understand your role in this environment, especially when you're talking about something as big picture as forestry and forest health. Like
Right.
that's going to take some time, and then all of a sudden you're going to step back and see the forest from the trees and be like, oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Pun
Yeah.
intended. Very
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it is going to kind of take that moment. Katrina, if we could talk about one program that y'all do called Women in Trees, and as one of the first generations of women in forestry, and having seen forestry from like your dad and your husband, and just have been there from like the very beginning, and now seeing kind of the state of it currently with women in forestry, I was wondering, how important are these types of programs, and then what has been the most fulfilling part for you for running them? Because Women in Trees is really, my understanding of it is, it's a women centric program that really teaches women about the professional aspect of forestry and the careers that
Mhm.
are out there and the communities that are out there, and what does that look like and what are you going to do, and really just expand that community.
Sure. So I'll give you a little bit of the history. I think it was about 2015. I was sitting in my colleague's office and we were talking about the number of women in our programs. The School of Environmental and Natural Resource Sciences has a lot of programs that are male dominated. And so there are a lot of women in our college, but not necessarily in our programs at that time.
Mm.
And so we were trying to think of a way to encourage younger women and women in general that were considering post secondary to come to Fleming College. And we were trying to think of something fun, like what would you want if you were a young person or a young woman thinking about post-secondary? How could we get the message out there? So I dreamed up, I said, like, what if we had an event where we could put 100 women and
In the
climbing
trees.
trees all at the same time? And my colleague was kind of like, oh,
It's a
because
logistical
A,
nightmare. Yeah.
yes, a ton of work, a logistical nightmare, blah blah blah. But but luckily at that time I was surrounded and I still am by people who dream big and
Mhm.
try and make it happen, and so we did. And it was one of the best experiences of my life to see so many young women, especially. And in our first event, we had three generations all in the same tree.
Oh,
So
cool.
daughter, mom,
Oh,
and grandma. It was so cool. It was
that's
so cool.
awesome.
Yeah, it was really neat. And my goal at that time, I said, if we just get one
Mm.
that comes back, we've done our job, right? I don't all these 100 people don't have to come here and learn about what we do, but we had the opportunity in that moment to first of all just expose these people, these women, to all of the different careers. So we had someone from the forest industry speak, and we had a what you call it, like a panel discussion.
Mhm.
So we had somebody from forestry, we had somebody from arboriculture and urban forestry. So we represented
The
all
whole
of
aspect.
the
Yeah.
yes, yeah, and then it just caught on. So we did that event for a couple of years, and then we combined with my colleague is a geologist to include geology, and just targeting these underrepresented fields. And I just think that those events or events like that, groups like this, help women see themselves
Mhm.
in a
Mhm.
role that they wouldn't traditionally see themselves in. And so I'm also part, I think I mentioned it to you, a group, Women in Wood, which is a Facebook based group of women that support each other in all things trees, mostly forestry, but it's a welcome place for anyone who works with trees. And it is essential. It is essential. And now the ball is rolling, right? It's like that snowball at the top of the hill.
Mhm.
It's small as it starts to roll, but in good packing snow, it builds momentum. And we're rolling.
We're
We
that
are
pack and
rolling.
snow. Yeah, exactly.
Yes,
Yes, we
yeah,
are.
we are that pack and snow.
Yeah.
But it is so true, right? And it's cool because I have a niece who came to the first event, and
Oh,
after that, she talked a lot about, how cool it is, and although that may not be the path that she chooses to follow, the exposure is what is key. Because if you're not exposed to something
you won't
and you
know.
have no idea,
It's the education part. We go back
like
back to the
me,
beginning. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I think it is. They are everything that it just raises awareness and increases opportunity or provides opportunity is key.
Oh, that's amazing. And honestly, thank you for probably giving me the most Canadian soundbite I've ever had on a podcast to be like, we are that packing snow. Like to be like the niche like analogy that
Totally.
only Canadians can get, to be like, do you know that like really good sticky snow? Like when it's rolling, to be like, yes, I do actually. I don't know if
Yeah.
other listeners in Australia will, but we
No.
know what we're talking about, you know? Like thank you for that. That's also going to stay. That and the web is going to stay with me today.
Awesome.
Fantastic, fantastic analogies. I love that answer, and I love how true it rings, because if you look at your guys' website and if you look at photos of women in wood, which I hope people do, and I'm going to link everything within the episode, but everyone is just grinning. Like everyone is
Hmm.
so jazzed and having so much fun. And like you could just see how joyful it is. And even if you choose not to go down the forestry or tree health route in whatever way, as if you don't choose that route, that's fine. At least you've now been exposed to something really, really cool. And you've started that beginning education. And I think it goes back to your story and your full circle moment. But I think it also goes back to the importance of getting the public having a baseline understanding of trees and a baseline understanding of
Mhm.
forestry. And I think it does that in spades, but it also brings a lot of underrepresented groups into a field that maybe historically has been male populated. So I think it's fantastic. I can't wait to see the next generation. I can't wait to see the bigger snowball. And I mean, it's,
The
yeah.
snowman that we're gonna build? The
Yes,
snow woman. We're gonna build a snow woman. What am I saying? Yeah.
yeah. I can't wait to see the snow woman. Like, it's pretty incredible. And I'm sure that for all of the people involved with the program and to you and your colleagues, I'm sure you guys just must be on cloud nine of seeing this next generation come through. Like, it's pretty special.
It's very rewarding.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Before we wrap it up, because I do want to ask a couple more photo or questions, sorry, not photos, a couple more questions is I do want to talk about homesteading because you have this wonderful YouTube channel and I think it's pretty amazing that you teach people some basics of homesteading. I went down a deep dive and I was like, what is this? And I wanted to know about your garden and how you're making all these things. And it was pretty incredible of like living basically off the grid and hunting and really connection back to the ecosystem and back to the planet. How did you get into this one is the first part of
Mhm.
that question. And then the second part again is probably education to the public is
Yep.
what could we take away as non-homesteaders to maybe feel a little bit more connected to our resources. I'm right in downtown Vancouver. I don't know if I'm going to live a homesteading life next day, but like what is something that I could maybe put into my routine to live a little bit off the grid?
Oh, but you can. Okay, I do not live off the grid. I am fully connected to the grid. I just push a button and all my lights kind of turn on. But so that is such a good question. My parents always had a huge garden growing up
Mm,
as a kid. So I saw how food was grown, and my mom and grandparents also preserved, mostly froze, a lot of their food except for made jam. And when I first was married, I was very interested in canning, but I really didn't know a lot about it. And I didn't know where to look for the resources. And so I leaned heavily on people who were older and
mhm.
still had that lifestyle. So I learned how to make pickles. That's like the gateway
Yes,
for
it is.
for for
Yeah,
all things
yeah,
homesteaded, right?
yeah,
Or jam. Those
yeah.
two things usually, start. And then really, I had a garden for as long as I can remember in some way, shape, or form. Like I grew some tomatoes,
Mhm.
right? Like,
Still a garden,
uh,
still counts. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And then when COVID hit, we had all this time,
Mm,
and I started to watch YouTube because
mm.
before that time, actually, I didn't watch a lot of TV or anything. My husband said to me one day, I found a channel that I think you're going to love. And it was called Roots of Refuge. And it was this woman called Jessica Sowards, and she grew tomatoes. And I was hooked. And honestly, so I really am a copycat, you know,
That's fine.
by the truest
Yeah,
sense of the name.
yeah.
But I was learning, and I learned so much. So I'd watch somebody do it. I'm like, I can grow carrots. I can grow this. I can
Mm.
grow this. And then as I was doing it, I was thinking, how many other people out there are just like me who, for whatever reason, think they can't, they shouldn't,
Or they don't know, have
X,
no
Y,
idea.
Z.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. And because I have a little bit of social media presence, I thought, even if some of my post students or past students want to learn or have this same
Aw,
excitement about,
yeah.
I'm going to share it with them and show them like, hey, I didn't know
So cool.
anything. Here we
Yeah.
go. Try this. It is this easy. And so I just tried to link resources because I'm big about like using your
Mhm.
resources, right? Like we don't have to know it all. Like there's all
No.
these other people. That's what education is, right? It's like, here you go.
Sharing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Here you go.
yeah, like,
Mhm.
here's what I do, you can do this too. And then it just became really important to me that I could do it, so I should do it. And the land has so much to offer, and that deep connection that you forge with the land is remarkable.
Mm,
And I don't even care if you don't have land like you.
mhm,
You can grow in a pot if you have a balcony, if you can get grow lights, if you have space, right?
mhm.
So it doesn't require a whole lot of resources. I just do it on a scale that I can manage. There's only two of us in our household, so I don't need to be a big producer. But it saves a lot of money, first
Yeah.
of all. It is thoroughly enjoyable. I can't explain like the euphoria I feel when I like work in the garden
Yeah.
and like work with the soil in my hands, and I harvest food that I know is healthy and nutritious for me from the land, and that I can it. So when I go to the grocery store, I literally walk down my stairs, go in the pantry, grab food or the freezer, and I eat it. And so when you say, what can you do? So right now, I have a batch of sauerkraut finishing on my counter that I bought at the grocery store. So
Mm.
if you buy canned, and you might not like that, Alexis, so don't feel
Oh,
any pressure.
no, no, I love it. I'm Polish. I mean, I was like, that's like
Oh,
my
there we go.
lifeblood. Yeah, exactly. Love
Yeah.
it.
So I learned to make sauerkraut, and for the expense that cabbages cost, because they are one of the cheaper, like
Hmm.
all groceries are expensive now, but you can turn them into a food that lasts months
Yeah.
in your freezer that is so good for you. Right. And so I really don't buy a lot of vegetables from the grocery store. I'll go and buy cabbage. I make sauerkraut, and that's our like greens on
Yeah.
our plate all winter long. And so that's what I would say to people. You definitely don't have to live off grid, because I don't. But if you want to empower yourself to bring food, healthier food,
Hmm.
into your home where you know what it is, it's like single or couple of ingredients. Sauerkraut is like cabbage and salt.
Yeah. You can
Then
start.
you can do something. There it is.
Yeah.
Just start. Yeah.
Oh, no, I love that. And thank you very much for like talking about that. And I knew that you didn't live off the grid, but like anyone who just lives a little bit more country, I'm like, okay, let's get to accessible off the grid, because I think
Right.
off the grid as it's true is very inaccessible, and I think it's a
Yes.
wonderful thing, but I think it's very hard. But let's maybe start making an urban version of that, or like a step towards that, right? And I love that idea that you just started fairly recently, like from your
Hmm.
YouTube. I thought you had been doing this for like 20 years. And it's so refreshing that you're like, yeah, no, you just start. Like it's only been a couple
Yeah.
years since COVID that we really dove into it. Like, yes, you had a garden your entire life, but like that you really, really got passionate about a couple of years ago, because I think that's so refreshing because it's accessible. It can be instantly be like, okay, well, I can do it then. If you just
Yes.
started and you're so passionate and you get so much joy and excitement about like living connected, like, yeah, that would be really cool to have as well. I think that's beautiful.
I like that. Living connected. That is seriously exactly it.
Yeah.
Exactly it.
And I know that this is maybe, I know we're off time, so I should go to the next one. But like one thing that you brought you brought to my attention that I would love to touch on as well is, I know whenever I do something that's maybe about like having resources that we already have and extending them instead of buying new. So like sewing or mending,
Mm.
or maybe finding just a more sustainable way to do it. I always feel connected to my next generation. And I love that you brought that back of like, that's where you learned, because I always think of my grandma who's Polish and who made nothing but
Mm.
pickles and like like smoked meat in like the living room, and it was just like,
Mm.
yeah,
Awesome.
like
Yes.
it's a niche taste, like it's not for everybody. I loved it, but like, yeah, chicken snack in like a living room is definitely a niche thing. But like to have that connection to your like next generation, to the older generation, and maybe to your ancestors and where you came from, I think it's just a very beautiful thing. So thank you for bringing that back and that aspect of homesteading.
Well, thanks for asking. I honestly, people say to me, I get the comments a lot. Well, when the world implodes, we're all coming to your house, and honestly, it is a little bit of
Yeah.
a sense of empowerment that I know that like I will survive. I hope. I mean, it's not. There's no impending doom, but just having a little bit of self sufficiency is nice. And literally, it really is all about empowerment,
Hmm.
right? Like just empowering people to know that they can do it. It does require work, which we are very used to instant gratification. Like I have soap curing, and that takes 5 weeks. When you make soap, you have to let it sit there for 5 weeks, so you can't just like make it and scrub away. But it's an exercise, I guess, in patience too, and just knowing that I can do it, trying it.
Yeah, why not? Like just seeing where it can
Hmm.
go. And maybe that's going to be like the theme of this, because I feel like it's a theme of kind of your story is just, I love that fumble along and that redefinition of fumble and chasing the football. And maybe it's just trying it and seeing what happens. But we spoke a little bit earlier and you mentioned following a dream and this idea to dream big, and that maybe that mindset of not putting everybody in that box and just trying something and expanding who you think you are and what you're capable of. In that spirit, if you were to speak to your younger self, what advice would you give her? And that's my last one.
Mm. There's a lot of things I would probably say to her, but I definitely think the biggest one would be don't fear the F word. And the F word is failure, because I think a lot of people are raised to believe that failure is a bad thing, but through failure, you have the most growth,
Mm.
which at the ripe old age of 47, I am just realizing now. And so if I could have one big message, it would be, be brave first, because you have to be to overcome that fear of failure, but not to fear it, that it is essential and that it's good. The word failure is associated with bad. And
Mhm.
it's really unfortunate because we avoid bad things and with anything that we do, and it makes it really difficult for growth. And yeah, that would be it, Alexis. Actually, yeah, don't fear the F word.
Yeah. No, I love that. I think like I don't feel the F word is perfect because I think it's like it's just right on the nose, honestly. Like you can't grow and you can't do something different and you can't do something new to you if you're too scared to try and too scared to
Hmm.
fail. And my dad would always say that like failure is honestly just the starting point. Like your starting point has
Hmm.
probably just moved and like now you know so much more that you didn't know and like you have a better foundation to make the next step because now you know what went wrong. Like you can only like
Right.
go up from here, right? Like you might as well keep going. Like don't worry about it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're living proof of that right now, right? Because you, even just with Peggy Workwear and all of this stuff, I mean, you're marching at the gates. You're throwing it all to the wind, and but that's how you have to do it. Like even just in this last year, I've done three things that I can think of tangibly that I have always been afraid to do, that I
Mm,
finally did with very good outcomes. The outcomes could not have been good,
mhm,
but that was okay at the time when I completed them. And then I was like, all right, like that gave me a lot of confidence and momentum to move forward in
mhm.
being trustful, that you like, that whole trust the process. You really just have to
Yeah.
trust the
Yeah,
process.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, trust the process and, like, I think you also get like, you learn how to trust yourself, and, like, I think, like, thank
Hmm.
you for saying that about Peggy, but, like, your testament too, like, you can see that your entire all the different steps that you took, I think it, like, was fated that it brought you back to tree health and what you've always been passionate about, but, like,
Hmm.
you tried so many different things, and you looked at different aspects of the same career, and then trying YouTube and trying homesteading. The fact that you haven't been a homesteader for 20 years blows my mind. Like I literally thought that you were next. Like that's crazy. That's crazy that it's only been a short time and trying something new and trust the process and trust yourself. I think that's beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Katrina, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been so lovely learning more about urban forestry and agriculture and tree health and pathogens and like forestry work in general and teaching the next generation of students. It's been such a beautiful conversation. So just thank you so much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for originally reaching out. It was great to hear from you, and I hope we can stay connected. And I'm happy to be part of this web or network that you're building, Alexis. So good on you. Good
Uh,
job. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. And it's an honor. It's an honor to be part of your web. And for sure, whenever you want to come back on the show, you let me know anything. I can't wait to have you back on. Thank you so much, Katrina. This has been lovely. And thank you all for listening. This has been the Smoko Podcast. We will see you next Wednesday. Thank you. Thank you. Bye bye for now.